Good day. Thank you for joining me today. I'm General George Washington. I've been asked by Congress to bring you up to date of the events that led up to the Declaration of Independence and the years that followed that. So I will start at the beginning. Let's talk about the French and Indian War, starting in 1755, running through 1763. While we were fighting the French here in the colonies, the mother country was fighting both in Europe and in India on 3 continents. And our part was to vanquish the French from the New World. And we were proud to fight alongside other Englishmen from England, the redcoats there. We fought, we were wounded, we died alongside of them. And we did vanquish the French from the Appalachians to the Mississippi and north through Canada as part of the spoils of war when England, Great Britain, won the 7 Years' War. Not only were we proud of fighting alongside other Englishmen, but we also were proud that the King and Parliament for 150 years as American colonies had allowed us to legislate ourselves. Each colony had a different charter with the King, and each one of us had some sort of legislature. For us in Virginia, we had the House of Burgesses. In Massachusetts, it was a different form, in others where we had representatives, we voted on things, we passed certain laws. We also had taxed ourselves with indirect as well as direct taxes and passed everything through the governor, the royal governor, that then reported back to Parliament and the King. And so we were an independent lot. We didn't necessarily agree wholeheartedly on every subject, but we worked through it in Virginia. But then we also found that at times we were in conflict with other colonies, and that's another story. But when it came to the French and Indian War, we were united and we fought. And in doing that, we benefited the crown, we benefited the aristocracy, we benefited the entire empire, because they did collect different fees from us, as well as they benefited through the mercantile system, which said that all products, all resources would go through England. They would manufacture, they'd process, they would sell them, and then they would sell certain things back to us. We did not do any manufacturing here. It all had to go through England, and so they benefited greatly. But we also did, because we had a ready market for our products and we did get certain monies for those, we were able to prosper and then improve our lot. But I also want to indicate that we did benefit as colonies here. We not only benefited from being part of the largest empire in the world that controlled the seas and the land, but we benefited from the safety that comes with that. And because they prevailed during the 7 Years' War, we benefited from large land masses between Appalachia and Mississippi, which were ceded to England from France as well as Canada. But we also agreed that the cost of war was extremely high. That to enlist a person, an Englishman, to train them so that they would fight as a unit, they'd know exactly what to do and when under command, but you had to clothe that particular individual. They had to have coats and shirts and breeches and shoes and hats, and both for summer and for winter time. They had to have muskets, and they had to have bayonets and black powder, cartouche boxes, and bullets and everything to fight with. And they had to be trained to use those things. But not only that, but you have to feed them. You have to house them. And once they're ready to go, you have to transport them to where they're going. Are they going to the European continent, or are they coming 3,000 miles to the colonies? That's expensive. They have to board a ship, and then it'll take 4, 6, sometimes 8 weeks to get to the colonies. And while they're on board ship in close quarters, they have to have births, they have to be fed, and sometimes disease breaks out. And then you have to have doctors and nurses to nurse them back to health. So it is a tantamount task to get them to where they're going. But once they arrive at the colonies, they have to have tents, they have to have cots, they have to have blankets. Once again, they have to be fed, they have to be drilled, there has to be doctors and nurses. And if you prevail in a year or two, those initial troops may be all that's necessary. But if it takes 3, 4, 6, 8 years, like it did in the French and Indian War, then there must be reinforcements, because those soldiers will get sick and die. They'll perish in battle, they'll be wounded, and there'll be convalescence. And so you have to continue to recruit more and to train and get them to where they're going. So there's enlistment that needs to be occurring at all times. And then when men perish, they need to be buried. And so that's a whole nother additional cost. And so we knew the high cost of war, not only on the colonies, but also on the continent, and some troops to India. And where did they get those funds from? We all here agreed and knew that initially the Crown expended the funds they had on hand. But when those were depleted, they looked around and borrowed funds from other nations that were allied with them, from aristocrats, from businessmen and merchants. But when they tapped those resources, they went to the English people and began to have direct tax, revenue-raising tax, to pay off that debt. That wasn't enough, so they said, well, let's see. We benefited the colonies. We helped them throw off the continual incursions of the French and the Indians, and we claimed land between the Appalachians and the Mississippi River to benefit the colonies. And so we need to give them a direct tax, a revenue tax. And oh yes, we're going to go ahead and house several thousand British troops there to protect them from the Indians. But then we noticed the Crown and Parliament began to make some changes. Initially, we were not alarmed, but over time, we became more and more alarmed. The first thing was the 1763 proclamation that the King and Parliament said those lands that were won from France between the Appalachians and the Mississippi River would not be available to us. We could not settle those lands, and we said, but that's part of the reason why we fought and died, was so that we could settle those lands, because the charters that we were given from the king initially went from the ocean to the Mississippi River. And now the king is saying, I'm sorry, you cannot do that. As a matter of fact, not only can you not settle them, but the settlers are there. They must come back to the east side of the Appalachians. That caused a great uproar in the colonies. But we went ahead and decided we would do that. Well, not everybody came back, and not everybody was pleased, but still we more or less went along with that. However, that was only the first step in a series of larger encroachments.